I stood near the back of the memorial service, hands folded, dressed in a crisp black suit, my hair tied neatly behind my head. The sun filtered down gently through the leaves above, dancing off the polished badges of uniformed officers, their faces solemn and unreadable. My brother, Officer Mark Reed, had died in the line of duty, a senseless shooting during a domestic disturbance. He was a hero, the kind people spoke of in reverent tones. Yet, even in this moment of collective grief, I knew my place in this family hadn't changed. I wasn't the hero. I wasn't the one anyone noticed. I was the one behind the radio, coordinating calls, dispatching officers, never in the spotlight. Dad always made sure I remembered that. As the eulogies continued, my father took the podium, adjusting his jacket, his voice thick with emotion. Mark, he said, was everything I ever hoped one of my children would become: brave, committed, honorable. The crowd nodded, murmurs of agreement rippling softly. And while my other daughter, well, he chuckled dryly, glancing around. She's just a dispatcher. The words fell like a stone in a still pond. I felt the hush sweep over the crowd, the shift in posture, the awkwardness that draped across the moment like a sheet. My face remained impassive, my jaw set. Inside, something twisted. Not anger, not sadness. Something deeper. A quiet certainty that moments like this, they define the story others believe about you, but they don't define the truth. As Dad walked back to his seat, smug and teary-eyed, he patted the folded flag in his lap. I kept my posture, eyes forward, because what he didn't know was that the truth, my truth, was about to rewrite everything he thought he understood. The service ended with the ceremonial 21-gun salute. Taps played and people began dispersing, hugging, sharing memories, placing single white roses near Mark's photograph. I stayed back, letting the waves of mourners move around me. As they did, two men in dark suits, their expressions unreadable, moved toward the front. They weren't wearing uniforms, but their posture, their subtle earpieces, and the quiet authority in their presence made people take notice. I recognized them, of course. Special Agent Paulson and Supervisory Agent Ward. They had flown in this morning, and we had exchanged a brief nod in the parking lot. Now, in the fading warmth of the day, they walked to the front of the service area, nodded to the funeral director, and asked for everyone's attention. The crowd paused, curiosity replacing grief. "We'd like to say a few words, Agent," Paulson said, his voice calm but firm. Not just for Officer Mark Reed, who served his community with honor, but for someone else present today. I could feel the burn of eyes turning toward me, confusion spreading like a slow fog. I remained still. Paulson continued, "There are those who serve in the spotlight and those who operate in the shadows, but both carry the weight of duty. Often without recognition." He turned directly toward me. "Special Agent Reed, would you please come forward?" The silence broke like glass. My father turned to me in disbelief, his face frozen in the midst of a half-smile. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Murmurs surged. I walked slowly, deliberately, toward the front. My heels clicked against the pavement, they only sound louder than the hammering in my chest. I passed old colleagues, neighbors, and officers who had never looked at me twice. I stood beside Paulson, meeting his eyes. He gave a subtle nod, then he spoke again. "Agent Reed has served this country for the last 6 years under deep cover. Her work has prevented bombings, intercepted cartel operations, and dismantled human trafficking rings. She has done more for this country than most ever will." I didn't look at my father, but I could feel the weight of his silence from across. The garden. It hadn't always been this way. My path to the FBI wasn't planned. I started as a dispatcher because I believed in calm during chaos and being the voice that kept others grounded. But I was always good at patterns, at seeing connections others missed. When a series of arsons swept through the county years ago, it was me who linked the calls. Not because it was my job, but because I couldn't ignore it. I passed the intel to a friend in law enforcement, and a week later, arrests were made. That small spark ignited something. The FBI reached out quietly. I trained in secret. I moved. Cities, changed names. I couldn't tell my family. I became someone else. Not for recognition, but because the world needed eyes that could see deeper. The missions were brutal. I had to gain the trust of men who would kill without blinking. I had to wear masks, lie through my teeth, and make impossible decisions. There were nights I sat alone in hotel rooms, bruised and empty, staring at my reflection, wondering if the world I was trying to protect would ever even know. And yet I did it. Every single time, because I believed it mattered. Because I wanted to be more than the forgotten daughter, the one who wasn't brave. And still, even after all of it, I had walked into my brother's funeral with my mouth shut, content to let my father think I was just a dispatcher until now. Until this moment, when the weight of all I had sacrificed was finally being named out loud. Agent Ward stepped forward, unfolding a document. On behalf of the Bureau, we honor Agent Reed for her exemplary service, her sacrifice, and her continued commitment to justice. He held out a small velvet box. I opened it and saw the metal inside. But more than that, I saw my father's face. His mouth opened slightly, eyes darting between me and the agents, trying to reconcile the version of me he had clung to for so long with the one now standing before him, being saluted by federal agents. My mother whispered something to him, that he didn't respond. His hand trembled slightly. I turned toward the crowd. I didn't come here to be honored, I said, my voice steady. I came here to honor my brother. But I also came to remind every girl in the shadows, every just a dispatcher, that your worth is not limited to how others see you. The silence was thick. Then a slow ripple of applause began. Officers nodded. Some stood. I could see in their faces a mixture of regret, surprise, respect. The applause grew, not for me, but for the idea that sometimes the person you overlook the most is the one who's been protecting you all along. Dad still hadn't moved. When I walked past him to return to my seat, he looked up at me, his eyes wet. For the first time in my life, he didn't have something dismissive to say. Instead, he stood slowly and whispered, I didn't know. I nodded, placing the medal gently into my coat pocket. You never asked, I replied softly as the crowd dispersed. The agents remained close, not as a security detail, but out of respect. Conversations buzzed around me, but I moved quietly, almost invisibly again, just like I had learned to. My father stood under a tree, staring at the memorial photo of Mark, his back slightly hunched, hands in his pockets. I approached him slowly, not out of fear, but because I wasn't sure if he was ready. When he turned, his face was older than I remembered it. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice low, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. I looked him in the eyes. Because you never saw me as someone worth listening to. He flinched, but didn't deny it. The silence between us carried the weight of years' dismissed dreams. Casual insults masked as jokes, choices I had made just to prove I didn't need his approval. You always made it clear Mark was the hero, I said. But I never wanted to be his competition. I wanted to be seen as my own person. He nodded slowly, his eyes blinking fast. He'd be proud of you, he said. He always looked up to you. I didn't see it back then, but you were his calm, his compass. I felt my throat tighten. He called me once during that drug house raid, the one that went sideways. I talked him through it on Dispatche. He survived that night because I kept him grounded. My dad swallowed hard. He told me you saved him that night. I just thought he was being dramatic. His voice cracked, and I saw the first honest tears fall from his eyes. I failed you, he whispered. I put a hand on his shoulder. I didn't need you to be perfect. I just needed you to see me. He nodded, ashamed and grieving. Maybe this was the beginning of something. Or maybe it was closure. Later that evening, after most had gone and the sun had dipped low enough to paint the sky in deep purples and golds, I stood alone at my brother's grave. The wind stirred the leaves gently. A few feet behind me, someone approached Agent. Paulson. He stood beside me in silence for a long while before speaking. You didn't have to step forward today. That was brave. I smiled faintly. Felt like the right time. He nodded. You think you'll stay in field operations? I hesitated. I had spent years chasing adrenaline, blending into lives that weren't mine, giving up birthdays, weddings, friendships, even safety. But something about today had shifted me. I think I'm ready to teach, maybe even train new agents. Build something instead of just breaking bad things down. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You'd be brilliant at it. And frankly, we need more like you people who understand what it means to be invisible and powerful at the same time. That phrase stayed with me, invisible and powerful. It summed up everything I had been forced to become, not just in the bureau, but in my own family. The quiet child, the overlooked daughter, the voice on the radio no one ever saw. And yet, when it mattered, I had been the strongest person in the room. Even stronger than I knew. Paulson said goodbye and left me alone again. I knelt beside Mark's grave and placed the medal on the corner of the stone for just a moment. I wish I could have told you, I whispered, but I think you always knew. A breeze lifted my hair slightly, almost like a nod from the universe. Then I took the medal back, stood up, and walked away, not as the dispatcher, not even just as the agent, but as someone who had finally fully become herself. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. Word spread, quietly at first, but soon I began receiving messages from young women in law enforcement, dispatchers, trainees, even girls still in high school who had heard about the story and saw something of themselves in it. One girl wrote, I used to think I wasn't brave enough to make a difference, but your story made me believe I could be the quiet hero too. I cried when I read that, because for all the pain I had swallowed, for all the nights I questioned my worth, there was meaning in this moment. My father and I spoke more frequently now. There was no grand transformation. He was still flawed, still stubborn, but he tried. He asked questions. He listened. He started referring to me as my daughter, the agent, almost proudly. And even though the child in me knew it came too late, the woman I had become knew that healing often walks slower than hurt. At the FBI, I took a new position at Quantico, working with the behavioral analysis unit, training recruits on how to read people, how to build trust, how to listen to the voices no one else hears. I used my past, my invisibility, as a strength. And sometimes I'd pull out the medal and place it on the desk during lectures, just for a moment, not to impress, but to remind them the world may underestimate you, but that doesn't mean you underestimate yourself. Because someday, when the moment comes, when the world is watching, or even when no one is, you'll rise not for applause. Not for revenge, but because it's who you are. That's the kind of agent I chose to be. That's the kind of woman I am. And that's what my brother would have wanted.